It's always especially fun for me to have conversations with guys who are my contemporaries or gals. And we directed a couple of the same years. Those were really special years and special programs. We can talk a little bit more about that. But Scott, Lee, it's good to see you. We haven't spoken in a long time, and
Right.
it's a blast to reconnect. So,
Absolutely.
uh,
Absolutely.
well, you get the question, you know what it is, but how does your Continental experience show up in what you're doing today? And tell us about what you're doing.
All right. Well, I'm currently serving a local church. I have been for the last 40, 45 years, honestly. But it's been interesting knowing that that was going to be the question
Yeah.
is to think how many areas it does show up and how few areas it doesn't show up.
Oh, wow.
My first church out of after my last year to direct, I immediately took a church in Fairhope, Alabama. I'm currently serving a church in Fairhope, Alabama, same church.
Oh,
And I was there for 4 years. We took our group through there. And the funny part was we felt God was preparing us for local church ministry. And from Denham Springs, Louisiana to Fort Myers, Florida, 7 nights straight, during concerts, either the pastor or a committee would come up and say, "Hey, would you be interested in coming on staff?" And we knew it, God was preparing us for that. So our trip that year was going down to the Caribbean.
wow.
And so anyway, we started here and got to serve a lot of churches in Florida and Georgia and most recently in South Carolina. Worked with Integrity Music for a little while and then had a real estate company. Anyway, God has brought us back full circle to Fairhope, Alabama, and to retire after this stint. And this is where grandkids are and all that.
Yeah.
When I went to First Baptist the first time, our kids had gone there. We did a concert. Concert was super well received, but the folks here were. It was brand new to them. It felt very contemporary to
Mhm.
this church, and the committees at the choir said the group on the bus, "Don't go there, please don't go there," and I'm so glad that I did because it really changed the trajectory of my life. So
Wow.
um, anyway, it's been kind of neat. So that's how we got here.
When did you go through there with the Continental Group? Do you remember what
It
year?
was in 80, it was in 83. Yeah,
83.
83. And we were at Southwestern Seminary during that time with Wayne Graham and Brent and different folks like that.
Right.
And I still had more seminary to go, but I just felt unsettled there. And so that's why we were praying whether we should take a church or not.
Right.
And, but honestly, Continentals, the reason I wanted to take a church was because of Continentals. During that time with them back in the 70s, God solidified my call to ministry. I knew I was supposed to do something like that, but I didn't know if it was to serve a church. I didn't really have, honestly, the talent to do anything at an artist level or anything like that. But God just began to make it clearer and clearer and clearer that this is what I was supposed to do in my life. And so
Wow.
it's been an incredibly exciting ministry life that I feel like God has really shined his favor on.
Wow. Well, you and I directed the same years in 82 and 83, but you had some Continental experience prior to that. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. I started in 1976, bicentennial year.
Yeah.
In fact, I got a funny story. I'm going to tell you about it because I get a chance to. But I started that year. I was just fresh out of high school, honestly, and was working for the city recreation department in Pensacola, Florida, where I'm from. And this group came to my church, and I'd never heard anything like it in my life. And Continental Singers. And so at the end, we go down and we get to sing Amazing Grace and audition. David Maddox was the auditioner for that particular, and I think
Wow.
he was scheduled to direct a tour, but that didn't work out. But anyway, he said, "Scott, I think you'd be great on my tour. I want you to go," and that kind of thing. So it was really very exciting. So, and it was the one around the United States and Canada. So that was in 76. It ended up that Brad Holmes was the director of that group, and Brad's had Spurlow blood going through his veins.
Right.
So our tour took us down through Central Florida, where Thurlow Spur was the music director or minister of music at the AG Church down there.
Yeah.
And so my solo on the bicentennial thing was "This land is mine. God made this land for me." Pat Boone thing. And I mean, I wailed on it. I loved it. It fit my voice perfectly. I was so excited. So now we're here down here in Thurlow Spurs Church. I knew this was important to Brad, and Brad was important to me. And so it came time for that. I stepped out on stage, and something happened in my ear, in my brain, and my mouth. But I started that song about a half step higher than the orchestra was playing. And I stayed there through the whole thing, not knowing it. And so afterwards, I'm feeling pretty good about myself, even though I realized that the response was much less than it typically had been.
Oh my gosh.
So afterwards, I said, "Hey, Brad, how did I do you proud?" That was probably one of his leadership moments. It's like, "Man, you embarrassed me to tears." He didn't say that, but it was great. But anyway, 76 was that. 76, I assisted Brad. We went to Northern Europe. And then in 79, I went with Jeremiah People. Jim Custer was directing that. And then I got married. I was supposed to, then I got married in 79, and um, 80, I guess, 81, we took Act One Company on the road to Northern Europe again.
Wow.
Then I served my home church in Pensacola for a little while, and then Cam called from Hawaii one day saying, "Hey, I want you to direct." And so 82 and 83 we directed. 82 was to the Northern Europe again, and 83 was to the Caribbean.
What's the through line through all those experiences, like takeaways for you that are maybe principles or things that you learned that have played out in your ministry over the years?
Well, it raised a bar of excellence that I never had really been a part of. And I think most folks who grew up in the church or sang in student choir or really even any type of music in the church, sometimes we fall into the habit of trying to make it as low a bar so it's accessible for folks. And when you find that you raise the bar, folks will jump as high as you ask them to.
Hmm.
And Cam set a bar that was just south of heaven, and it was amazing what not only I, but all the folks that were involved with it were willing to attempt to do. And then through his motivation and God's leadership and maybe a little bit of God-given talent, we were able to do it. So I think one of the things that stood out to me is that we can pretty much, we limit ourselves, and that if we're under the right leader and that leader casts a vision that is one that you can really see and one that you can own, you're willing to do whatever you need to do. And then I think I think excellence, even in the details, and oftentimes the details are important for that excellence to happen. I remember when I came to this church right after my second tour, and I took my kids on choir tour, and I had them taping the lines down, with at that time duct tape, and making sure everything was straight. All the details are handed, and they looked at me like I had two heads. But it was excellent attention to detail like that made Continentals what it was.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
so excellence, and knowing that excellence is never out of style, no matter what you do, whether it's in worship ministry or whether it's in administration or sales, whatever it might be, that being excellent is God's command on us. And so that was certainly a takeaway. My last position was with the South Carolina Baptist Convention. I was a chief administrative officer. And I've always loved administration. And I was thinking earlier today, when did that come up? Because I was really not necessarily a great uh, studier or anything like that. And then I got thinking, when we conducted Continentals, we were personnel management, we were inventory control, we were financial control, we were scheduling, we were all these things that all of a sudden I'm applying into life all the time. So yeah, I can't think of hardly any area of my life that I don't refer back to Continentals. And especially if I run into anybody that is a Continental, boy, you can just sit down and drink cup of coffee after cup of coffee on that.
Yeah, there's an interesting sort of connective tissue there. In fact, just Karen and I are coming off of a great week last week in Nashville, and we're starting a series of leadership gatherings. And so we started in Nashville because there's so many former Continentals there.
Sure.
And we were having a board meeting there, and Monty Kelso, who's on the board, said, "Hey, why don't we do the board meeting back here this year?" And then it morphed into something else, and we included a gathering. It had, I don't know, 45 or 50 people there just last Tuesday night, and that is instantly there. That people that I hadn't seen for years or had a conversation with for many years in some cases, you just pick up where you left off. And that's a really unique thing. In fact, the husband of one of the gals who was there, she was part of the Continental ministry through Jeremiah people, but her husband had not. And he said something interesting to me that night. He said, there's an authenticity here that's in the room. He says, I'm a pastor, I lead church staffs, and we have staff meetings, and somebody will pray and we'll have food and whatever. But here there's something really different. There's just an instant authenticity that is palpable. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about. I feel that too. It's something very specially shared. In fact, you and I have something else in common, in that my first Continental tour was with Brad Holmes in 1978.
Wow.
Brad was my director, and an incredible experience and a great leader.
Great leader, great musician. I mean, oftentimes I probably learned to conduct under Brad. I remember he had me conducting a 4/4 pattern by throwing a ball up in the air with my left hand and conducting with my right hand. And I felt like I was used 2 left feet.
Right.
But he had me doing a lot of things to try to do that, to make me better. And he did. So
seems like one of the things you learn in directing a Continental tour is dealing with people from all different places, different walks of life, different church experiences. What was that like for you as a leader?
Well, pluses and negatives, but the pluses were that was really, I think, the success of a director. I mean, all of us had a certain level of skill, or Cam would never have trusted us. But dealing with people, when you got a 90-day tour with kids, and I'm going to say kids, I was one of them, barely by 1 year, but most of them were under 20, under 22 for sure. And to keep them focused and with their heart in the right place, and try to grow them spiritually when I was in the middle of growing spiritually myself. It was challenging. And I will say that on both of the tours that I directed, I had to send some folks home. And there's nothing in me that wanted to do that. In fact, it was terrible, but it was time. And on both of those tours to do that, because the whole was suffering because of the few. And that was a learning experience. I've used that as a backdrop a bunch of times in ministry and in my secular work. So yeah, that was tough. The people part is tough. The good part about the people part is that growing up in the Bible Belt, in my Southern Baptist bubble, that this is the way we do it. We're the biggest, so we must be the only way. And to realize that there is a lot of different methods to get to the same finish line. And the finish line is what's important. And to learn from these kids, people, about methods and the way they grew up, and that their heritage was the same as mine was, just a little bit different. It was really enlightening, and it's helped me to embrace a lot of things, from worship style to history to the whole 9 yards. It's great. So I love the people part of it. Is probably one of the things that I'll remember the most.
Have you ever wished you could gift your life-changing Continental experience to someone else? Well, you can. Your monthly giving can make a huge impact for our teams all over the world. Did you know that this year, we'll have more than 20 Continental groups on the road, communicating in 7 different languages? The Continental story goes on, so keep writing your part of it by being on our support team. And our groups will say, thank you, in 7 different languages.
All over the world, God's Spirit